Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast for June 6, 2013. Today, we've brought a panel of experts together to follow up to the podcast that we recorded on May 22nd, which regarded the CJ series and WAAS capability. And at that time, we asked the Citation Jet Pilots Association to pose additional questions that you have to us regarding the discussion we had on that day. And we've looked at those questions, we've put them together into a presentation, and today we're going to discuss those questions with you and try to go a little bit deeper into some of the subjects that were of concern to you. I'll begin by introducing myself again. I'm Joel Mugglin. I'm a program manager in customer support at Cessna. Just here to my left is Steven Smothers. He's a pilot and an engineer in our engineering business development team. To his left is Dave Luckert. Dave is the manager of the Advanced Citation Modification team in customer service. And finally, we have Rob Below. He's the customer service engineer who's primarily responsible for pilot services and technical services, answering a lot of questions that pilots call in with all the time. So we have a good group of people here to discuss your questions. The main focus of today's discussion, I want to make clear, is mainly on the CJ1+, 2+, 3, and 4. We will be talking about some other models in the discussion as well, but most of the questions that were posed seem to be in the context of the newer CJs that have the integrated FMS 3000 as the FMS. So just understand that a lot of what we'll be talking about today will be couched in those terms. But we will also preface our remarks when we're talking about other models as well. To begin, we're going to give a few definitions, just like we did in our last related podcast. We'd like to just make sure that everyone listening understands some key terms. So to do that, we're going to have Rob Below give us a few definitions.
Thanks, Joel. Next generation air traffic management and navigation, or next-gen, as most people call it, is actually a concept that's been around for quite a while. 10 years ago, we called it communication, navigation, surveillance, air traffic management advances. Now we just call it next-gen. That includes 5 basic elements. ADS-B, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, is where your transponder transmits as much GPS data as it can. Data communications, we're moving from verbal communications to digital communications. Clearances and messages can be relayed digitally instead of by voice. Performance-based navigation, we're going to talk a lot about that, things like WAAS and RF and RNP. NNEW stands for Next-Gen Network-Enabled Weather. We're really not going to talk much about that, but it is part of Next-Gen. SWIM, System-Wide Information Management, better use of information systems and less redundancy in those systems. Honestly, we're not going to talk about that much either. And then finally, NAS voice switching. It's basically improvements in the ground communication systems that ATC uses. What we're really going to focus on is ADS-B and PBN.
I think that's an important point because next-gen is a very broad term. People use it somewhat loosely to refer to anything that's coming down the road in terms of avionics in the future. But to Rob's point, there are really some specific capabilities that are really needed in the nearer term because we're talking about a development process that's going to take well over a decade before and even then we may not say, well, we're done with next gen, then it will probably be new technologies that are coming down the road. So we want to focus today on a few key things.
And there are various stages that are going to occur starting last year and going out to, what, 2025? Yeah. Oh, ADS-B out. Sorry, the next definition. ADS-B out is essentially it's the ability of your transponder to take GPS data and provide that to ATC and eventually to other airplanes. It's the movement from a radar-based surveillance system to a satellite-based surveillance system. ADS-B out is the ability of the airplane to transmit that data. ADS-B in is the ability of your airplane to take that data in and display it and use it. RF legs, we're getting into the PBN part of it, performance-based navigation, WAAS, RNP, those kinds of capabilities. A lot of the questions that were asked deal with RF legs. In my mind, it's similar to a DME ARC except instead of using a ground-based nav aid, you're using a GPS-defined track that might revolve around a GPS waypoint or an imaginary point. But they're similar to a DME arc, and they're completely satellite-based. Typically, they connect two track-to-fix straight legs with a curve. Alignment to the final approach course. There are a couple of slides that we've pulled up that show what an existing GPS or an older GPS approach looks like at Missoula to runway 11. And you can see that instead of squared angles to turn into final approach, the RF leg provides a gradual, smooth course transition. And if you look at these approaches that we've got for you, it also gives you lower altitudes and gets you under the weather sooner. There's actually several benefits. Stephen is going to talk a lot more about this, but most of the approaches that incorporate RF legs are authorization required approaches, or what we used to call SAR approaches.
Okay, well, we're going to get into the questions now. We've talked about some definitions, so now we'll address each of the questions that were posted on the CJP website in response to the last podcast. We've grouped them somewhat logically, hopefully, and into an order that I think makes sense for the flow of this discussion. The first question is, it says ADS-B and RF leg capabilities are mentioned as capabilities that build upon WAAS. What is Cessna's upgrade path for ADS-B and RF legs in our citations? And for that, I'm going to ask Stephen Smothers to address that.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Well, the good news is we do have a solution that is going to be available very soon for the CJ1 Plus, the CJ2 Plus, the 3, and the 4. And what Collins is their technology solutions is to take the existing transponder, the TD94D-409, and to replace it with an ADS-B 260B compliant, and that's the standard that the U.S. mandate addresses, and also the European mandate, the 260B. So that transponder, the TD94 Delta-500, is now at Cessna, and we're doing some flight test and certification. Once we have that complete, then we'll be able to put that inline flow, and then shortly thereafter we'll have a service bulletin available for our legacy aircraft, our fleet.
So they're both 94Ds, and the difference is the dash number there, dash 409 versus dash 500?
Correct.
Yeah. What does that entail?
Well, it's probably a software upgrade into the hardware, and the D, of course, is the diversity that integrates with your TCAS-2 system, so that you have both TCAS functionality and your ADS-B out.
Gotcha.
It's probably important to point out, too, that some of the earlier CJ1 pluses, 2 pluses, and the early 3s actually had an earlier part number transponder. I believe it was a dash 208, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a couple different configurations out there, even amongst those 4 models. So Collins had to do quite a bit of work to get to the point that we're almost at now of having ADS-B fully DO260B compliant ADS-B out transponders available.
Now, as far as addressing RF legs, well, first off, RF legs, it's really going to give a lot more capability to the airspace. The people who are designing the procedures into the metroplexes and into the mountainous terrains can use an RF turn, like Rob was saying, instead of using VOR to VOR tracks, can actually design the airspace to allow more capability in lower weather conditions, which increases throughput, and the operator to be able to have more access in lower weather. So the RF capability is coming into the NAS. There are quite a few approaches that have RF capability, but right now, like you said, most of them are authorization required, or the old SAR. So that requires 2 components. First off, the aircraft has to have special equipment. Mainly, it is an RNP capable airplane, which means that it has alerting and monitoring to evaluate the comparison of the required navigation performance, and most RF legs are probably going to have something starting at least at 0.3, third of a mile, but they can go finer. And then it's the ability to monitor the actual navigation performance compared compared to the required. So that's the alerting and monitoring function that the aircraft has to have. The other component of that is, of course, going to be the training. Pilots are going to have training in the syllabus, just like we train to do missed approaches or single engine rejected takeoffs, all those things. It's just part of the syllabus. They're going to have special training to do RMP procedures.
As well as special approval from their own FSDO, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think of steep approach when I think of that.
Exactly.
It's a special training and LOA and so forth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the good news is that the technology is not, it is mature. And so we have the functionality in the FMS 3000. We just haven't certified it because right now it's primarily used in 135 and 121 operations. Now, of all the approaches that we've looked at in today's national airspace, we actually found one over in Carlsbad, California, that is a GPS approach that has an RF leg on it. Now, the chart that you're probably looking at, if you look at the IAF, you'll see down below that there is a statement there that says RF required to fly this turn.
Kind of buried in there.
It is buried in there. So, you have to really look at this, but this shouldn't show up in your FMS if it's not capable. But that, again, we need to talk with your avionics, your supplier of your data. But this is an example of an approach that is available for Part 91 to fly with an RF turn. Now, the RF turn, as Rob said, is a precise ground track. If you do not stay on that ground track, then you are obviously getting outside the containment zone, and that could be very hazardous. As you can see in this chart, there's a mountain peak that is off to the east that would obviously cause some problems. And so again, you have to look and see when are you going to be able to use this capability. As we see more and more approaches start taking advantage of RF capability, then we will put this higher up on our priority list to be able to certify that.
So again, to reiterate what you're saying here, Steve, it sounds like these approaches that we're looking at, like this one into Carlsbad, this is not an authorization required approach.
Exactly.
This is kind of somewhat of a newer animal then, right?
Right.
We don't see a lot of these out there yet,
right?
But it's possible that we may see more of them. That Part 91 operators or operators who don't go through the AR approval process may be able to use these.
Right.
But on the actual chart depiction, you pointed out earlier that it is going to say RF required, and that doesn't imply special training, but it implies capability has to be there.
Right.
And also the difference between GPS in the title and RNP in the title. Is that essentially indicating that the requirements are a bit
yeah, I think that's a differentiator. If you see RNP up there in parentheses, then that would presumably, I've never seen one yet that didn't say authorization required down below.
Okay.
But if you see RNAV GPS and then there's an RF leg in there, it should say somewhere in there RF capability required, so that you have the capability.
Right.
And again, for the CJs, this is something that Collins has developed in their FMS. We have not yet certified that. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Now, Steve, is it just the ability to fly the approach that's the benefit, or is it a fuel burn? Is it a time savings? What are the benefits?
It's twofold. First off, the airspace designers see that they'll be able to increase throughput in certain areas. Separation, exactly. For the operator, though, there is a benefit because it is you'll have reduced track miles, which is going to save in fuel and time. So that you do get a benefit, operational benefit, by having that capability.
I believe also a lot of authorization required approaches tend to be in situations where you have to avoid mountain peaks or something like that. Whereas the tendency of the FAA to perhaps develop more of these non-AR approaches with RF legs would be things like busy airport environments, taking the traffic over more optimal routes, perhaps even keeping them away from populated areas for noise abatement, that kind of thing, where it's not so critical that you have to train the crew because that tight track keeping accuracy required for mountains. In this case, maybe you don't need quite that level. So that's kind of a differentiator there, I think, too. Okay, the next question that we had was, why shouldn't we wait until Cessna announces its ADS-B and RF legs upgrade path and implement them along with WAAS at one time? And Stephen, I think you're going to address that one.
That's a good strategy. You can wait. And it really just is going to depend upon the operator, where they operate. how often they operate. If a WAAS approach is available and you're not able to fly it, and so you're either diverting or you're not able to get in when you want to because of weather, and you put in a WAAS capability, a WAAS LPV capability, well, you're getting a benefit, and I would go ahead and encourage that operator to equip. Now, we talked about the last video about, well, that requires a certain type of GPS engine, which is the SBAS, and now if you have that, you have the capability to do WAAS LPV. So again, if you wait because you don't really will achieve a benefit, that's not going to hurt you, but if you wait too long, then there's going to be a big pileup of everybody trying to get into the service center to get their upgrade, and you could not get it when you expected it.
But if I fly into airports that all have 2 or 3 ILSs, I might as well wait a little while until it's all of these developments occur. Okay.
Okay, next question. Is Cessna far enough along in the engineering for ADS-B and RF legs to assure us that the WAAS components will work without a costly change in direction? It's a good question, but in general, we can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that the WAAS capability that's already there for the FMS 3000 in the integrated ProLine 21 platforms is pretty well defined. People have been flying these approaches now for a couple of years, and we don't anticipate sweeping changes to the way the WAAS system works just to support some future iteration of ADS-B, for example. We don't foresee that. Even ADS-B out itself is pretty well defined now. Now, there has been a pathway of changes being made by the FAA to the standards for ADS-B out capability over the past few years, and that's caused some difficulties, actually. Collins was very proactive in trying to get ready for ADS-B out, and they really jumped on getting their transponders on a path to being upgraded. But when the FAA changed the technical standard order, I guess TSO definition, a couple of times, they moved the goalpost some. So Collins says it's been somewhat difficult for them. But at this point, we can say ADS-B out is pretty well defined. The ADS-B in capability, well, that's a different situation. That's further down the road. That's still being discussed and defined by the FAA and by the industry and some of the special committees, so we can certainly expect to see some motion there. But as far as WAAS and what's going to be needed for ADS-B out, we don't anticipate big changes at this point for the integrated ProLine 21 platform. Next question. The FAA has a history of extending equipment mandates. The airline upgrade cycle will drive whether the ADS-B equipment mandate schedule will stick. Do we know where the airline industry is with making the FAA mandate timeline? Stephen, can you take that one?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Well, the airlines, they are on a cycle right now where they are refreshing the fleet, because next-gen mandates are not only in the U.S., but they're in Europe. They see changes that are happening in the North Atlantic, also in Australia. So the airlines are being proactive and starting to implement a schedule to refresh the fleet. For example, Delta just recently signed a contract with ISS for a $60 million upgrade to dual GPS with RNP and RTA, which is required time of arrival capability in their FMS, and also a datacom package. So they are, and that's for their MD-88s, and those are an older aircraft. So they're putting this technology in, and the airlines actually want to have, as they make these investments, they want to start seeing the return on investment. So they're really kind of poking at the FAA saying, you know, we've started to invest in this technology. You tell us about this timeline that's coming along. We want to have a return sooner than later. We don't want to wait till 2020, turn on the switch, and now we start getting capability. As we implement this technology refresh in the fleet, we want to start taking advantage of it. The airlines would rather do an RF turn to a 5-mile final than radar vectors to a 15-mile final. So it helps increase their throughput. Actually, it helps the FAA also with their air traffic management, so both sides are benefiting. So next gen is real, and the mandates are not going to slip.
Is it a true statement that because of the operational benefits the airlines see, they tend to be a little bit ahead of the business aviation community, especially when you think about getting a lot more traffic into a tight environment? And the airlines are all about that, and so they do tend to be ahead and getting equipment equipment going.
Even ahead of the government.
In some cases. And if a mandate slides, that doesn't mean the airlines haven't done their job to get ready.
Exactly.
It's typically millions of dollars of benefit for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, true. Okay, we've grouped the next 3 questions. They're all somewhat related. I'll read through them. Right now, the ProLine 21 platform on citation seems to be a dead end. I would love for Cessna to make some statements and commitments to prove me wrong. The second question was, will the citations with ProLine 21 ever get the option of SVS and other enhancements Collins has available? And the third question is, I see all these other ProLine equipped aircraft getting SVS and HUDs, CPDLC, etc. I have no idea if Cessna plans on backing any of these upgrades for the CJ4 or others. I would hate to think that a G3000 or 5000 retrofit upgrade will be the only option for an aircraft I took delivery of 7 months ago. These are good questions. We understand you're asking about the ProLine 21 roadmap. How committed are Collins and Cessna to the future ProLine 21? And I definitely want to help you understand that we are. Collins is very committed to the future ProLine 21. A good example of that is the recent announcement at eBase this year of the Challenger 350. Whereas I think some of us were probably expecting that the next iteration of the Challenger would go to the Fusion platform with Collins, it has not. It is a ProLine 21 Advanced, as they call it, platform. I've checked the specs on the 350. It's a lot of what we expect in ProLine 21. A few additional things for an aircraft of that size. They are including synthetic vision as standard with that, but it really is the ProLine 21 system in many ways that we're familiar with. Cessna is still committed too. We're still delivering new aircraft with the ProLine 21 system. The CJ2 Plus, 3 and 4, XLS Plus is still delivering with it. It's still a very good system, very capable. And there are many aircraft in the field with ProLine 21 as well. We're very aware of that. We want to keep everyone flying just as long as we possibly can with that platform, so we are committed. The other thing I'd like to point out about the ProLine 21 system is that to this point, all known mandates are currently addressed. Collins has done a good job over the years of anticipating these things, trying to be proactive, trying to get ahead of them. There are no mandates out there that we're aware of at this point that Collins is not addressing with something in their roadmap for ProLine 21. So that's a very important point to keep in mind. That's not to say that it has an indefinite life. Obviously, every avionics system that's ever been built has a point in time where it just cannot be re-architected to take into account some of the new developments, some of the data-intensive kinds of applications that may be coming, for example, with ADS-B in. That would require potentially a lot of re-architecture, and it just may not be cost-effective to do that at a certain point. But at this point, we don't have that in sight yet.
I was just going to say, that point is not in sight yet.
Yeah.
It's a ways off.
ADS-B in still being defined. It's really difficult to say, but certainly there's no talk of any mandates for ADS-B in on the foreseeable intermediate term future at this point. So, okay, another point about the future of ProLine 21 that I'd like to make, just as an example of how proactive Collins has been over the years in ProLine 21, is just to point out that ProLine 21 was originally developed in the 1990s, but Collins has done a great job through the early 2000s in introducing things like the file server. That wasn't part of the original ProLine 21 program. And of course that brought in electronic charts, graphical weather, as well as some improvements to the graphics on the moving map. And then with ADS-B out, Collins was one of the first of our avionics suppliers to come and say, hey, we've got a transponder ready for you. Turned out, as I mentioned earlier, that the FAA moved the goalposts on them, which made it difficult for all of us. But they have been very proactive with that. And then with Link 2000 Plus, again, kudos to Collins for coming out with plans early on to get that implemented. Again, they've had to endure some pain because the European Commission has been anything but clear, and the path there has been anything but straightforward. Up to the point, even today, there's still a lot of challenges there. But we're close. We're close to getting the Link 2000 Plus CPDLC for those who operate in Europe, and we should be getting that done very soon. RF legs, again, they don't have RF legs for AR type approaches, but that doesn't really concern most of the operators in this class of airplane. But they're still putting RF legs in there in anticipation of the future of that capability for non-AR approaches. So Collins has a good history here, and I think we can expect them to really make good on keeping Proline 21 active for as long as possible.
And Joel, also, in addition to the proactive response for Link, they also have a path forward for fans with the Proline 21.
That's true. With the Challenger 350, they mentioned that fans capability is now coming into the equation. I think I even saw something about RNP-AR for the 0.3 level. Again, that class of airplane, you kind of expect this sort of thing. Wouldn't expect to see very many CJ operators needing fans anytime soon or wanting to equip with that. But yes, more investment is going on, and that's an important point. Regarding synthetic vision for Proline 21, we've all known that for some time Collins has been working with another avionics supplier to federate a synthetic vision system that can then display on the top part of the PFDs. And we are in active discussion with Collins about that. I do want people to understand that. We haven't cleared the hurdles yet. There is substantial engineering cost. Part of the challenge is, even though you might think all the displays are pretty much the same from the 1+, 2+, 3, and 4, it's not always the case. And sometimes even within one model, we had a part number change at some point to accommodate some kind of a change. And so we can't say that we're there yet, but we're in serious discussions with them. I hope we can do it. Some of it's going to depend upon what we anticipate the customer demand to be at what we think is going to be the estimated price level. And if we can justify that, we will. If we can't, we would just be wasting our time and everyone else's too. But we are aware that there are other suppliers who are doing this. We're trying hard to see if we can get the business case to where we need it to be to go forward.
That's not going to be cheap for us, though, is it?
I don't have a good feel for all of the cost right now, but I do know it's not cheap. There's actually some substantial re-engineering work that Collins has to do that we will have to pay them for in order to, as a non-recurring engineering cost, in order to be able to get the capability to work with the various types of displays that are out there. It's not their box that they're federating, and so there's some changes they have to make to their architecture. So it's not a simple thing, but we are aware of people's desire for it, and we hope we can get there.
Can we touch on HUD?
Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
I know that there is a Collins fit for a forward fit for future, and I think you mentioned Fusion over lunch today. But as far as Collins Proline 21, personally, I don't see heads-up displays in the mix, not even for synthetic vision.
We talked with Collins about that yesterday. You were in that conversation, and they do not have a HUD solution for the Proline 21 platform at all at this point. They haven't announced it. They aren't. There's nothing they're talking about publicly, certainly, and they do have it in the context of their Fusion platform. And they do have another one that they've been looking at, just kind of some concepts, but they're not talking about anything in terms of Proline 21 at this point. And so it's not clear that will ever come to the mix. Even for the Challenger 350, it's my understanding that at this point they're not doing a HUD for that platform.
But it doesn't really buy you a great deal of benefits. I mean, I'd focus more on synthetic vision myself.
Yes, that's true. And in terms of HUD, generally speaking, to get any operational benefit, for example, to fly down to 100 feet AGL on an ILS approach, you'd have to have a cooled infrared camera, which is very expensive, and you're talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to equip with that. Plus, I think there's some training requirements there as well. So that's a good point. But HUD is not something that we foresee for Proline 21 at this point, if ever.
We've investigated HUD many times. Also, we just have a real challenge of fitting it in our cockpits as well. I don't think we've ever found one that would fit in the CJ series.
500 series. Yeah.
Right.
That's not to say we aren't looking at them. We continue to look at them.
We do.
But it's not something that we can say right now, yes, there's going to be a HUD for Proline 21.
To be honest, I wouldn't have even brought it up if it hadn't been mentioned in the question.
Right, it was. No, thank you.
I did want to mention it.
That was a good point. Thank you. Okay. This question here says, I'm concerned that even if Cessna supports the Proline 21 upgrades, they may be expensive and have the minimum features required. What is going to be the cost to take a non-WAAS Proline 21 CJ1 plus 2 plus or 3 to next gen with WAAS plus ADS-B plus CPDLC over $200,000? And then the next question is, can Cessna publicly state MSRP costs or cost ranges for the various citation model WAAS upgrades, as there are many numbers mentioned coming from different sources? there's two parts really to these two questions. The first one I'll address is the features required. You know, you really can't talk about a minimal feature set with what Collins has available now and what's coming. The FMS 3000 with WAAS can fly fully coupled LPV and LNAV, VNAV approaches. It supports all the US WAAS requirements for ADS-B out. In terms of RF leg capability, at this point, that's not even being used, yet they have something that's going to be available when that is more of a factor. ADS-B out transponders there's a set definition of what that's going to require, and it meets the requirements for DO260B, as we talked about. So I don't see this being a minimal feature set as far as those capabilities are concerned. Again, Link 2000, when we get that finished, hopefully, I think it's later this year or early next year. But in any event, once we get that done, that's going to meet the requirements for Link 2000. So for the nearer term, the mandatory requirements, I don't see a minimal feature set being something to describe what they have. Mm-hmm. But, you know, again, I've talked about synthetic vision. Those would be some of the nice-to-have technologies that we hope we can do, and there is even a potential path there too. So I think it's pretty robust. But the next part of the question, or the next question, concerned pricing. I did talk to our sales department, and I did get permission, because this is a focused discussion on the 1+, 2+, 3, and 4, to talk about the specifics of pricing, because that's a pretty narrow subset of airplanes. The single WAAS FMS upgrade runs about $65,000 at the service center. There is a service bulletin for that. If you do a dual WAAS upgrade, it's about $90,000. I do want to point out that this is for the U.S. market and a U.S. service center. Labor rates being different in other countries, Europe, for example, the prices will be different. But this is just a general figure that you can use. Now, one thing I do want to point out, though, this is just for these models. If you start talking about the 1 or the 2 or the CJ, now you're talking about different...
Wait, you mean CJ1 and CJ2?
I'm sorry, I did mean the CJ. Thank you.
Out there too.
Yeah, the CJ1, CJ2. Now you're talking about different FMSs from Universal, things like that. Bendix King, I think we have some of them in there. And so now it becomes a very specific to the aircraft kind of configuration. So your best bet there is to call sales. They'll have to look up and see what you've got in order to quote you whatever WAAS solution might be available there.
And one thing I heard you say again over lunch is where we have a set configuration and a set starting point, as we do with the later model 525s and FMS 3000, we've got a known starting point there, so we can right. talk money.
Right.
But with the earlier airplanes, you really don't have a defined starting point, and we can't give you a quote right now. But if you contact the service center.
And that's right, and that's why there may be some confusion about pricing too, because one person may call and he may have one configuration, he gets one price, he tells somebody else, and then that person expects the same, but he may get a different quote, and it's not always real clear why that happens, but we wanted to explain that a little bit. Okay, we don't have any pricing yet for ADS-B. We're close to getting our certification done for that this year, but we don't have pricing for that or Link 2000 Plus. But stay tuned. We do have some programs coming out soon. We expect some discussion within the next month or two about some options we're going to proactively make available for the CJ series in particular. So stay tuned for that. There will be some pricing with that, so particularly with ADS-B transponders and some of the pathway there. So stay tuned.
You're talking ADS-B out there, right?
ADS-B out, yes. Okay. Yeah, definitely. ADS-B in is still out down the road. So it's ADS-B out is ADS-B in is in, but it's down the road.
ADS-B out is in.
We could get confused there, couldn't we? ADS-B out is in, ADS-B in is down the road. Sorry. Yeah, thanks. Good point. In or out. Okay.
Before we go to that next question, Joel, I just want to talk about, again, Next Gen is a transformation of today's airspace into, we have a destination. We're going to eventually get to 4-dimensional trajectory-based operations. That's not going to happen for 2025 time frame. But the technology that you just mentioned, that you mentioned as basic, I mean, it's very sophisticated, but it takes care of those CNS. You know, first off, you got C, which is the communication for link. We've got a solution. Fans, well, we don't really need it right now in today's airspace, but there is a pathway that Collins is looking at.
And that's future of air navigation system?
Future Air Navigation System, yes.
Okay.
And that's a data communications program.
Gotcha.
And then you've talked about the N is the performance-based navigation. This FMS is very capable, all the way down to Category 1 LPV approaches, all satellite-based, very capable. And then, of course, the surveillance, the ADS-B out. We don't need ADS-B in yet, but we've got everything need until we get to 2020. So we've got a very good...
and beyond, really. I mean, you say 2020 because that's when the U.S. ADS-B out mandate hits,
exactly.
But there will be time beyond that in which you will be compliant and continue to be able to fly.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay, next question. For this one, we're going to divert a little bit from the CJ series. Okay, this question was inserted by someone in the discussion who operates a 560. So we're going to address this one now. It says for 550 and 560 legacy airplanes, Cessna now has WAAS LPV available based on the UNS-1E FMS with dual WAAS GPS units and an approach monitor for critical redundancy. However, without a final definition of next-gen requirements, it is very unclear what is needed when. Without clarity from Cessna, why should we act now? Dave, I think you'd be the best one to try to tackle this one.
Well, thanks, Joel. I'd like to reiterate, yes, we do have solutions for the aircraft with the P1000 avionics suite. This would be the Bravo, the Ultra, the Encore, the XL, XLS. And as Steve said so well earlier, it is an acceptable strategy to wait if you feel that you just really don't have the needs for WAAS at this time. However, I would like to point out there are operational benefits you should consider. On the slide now you can see, and I just got this off the FAA website today, and you can see that LP3 procedures, there's 3,123 of them, and over 800 of those have minimums down to 200 feet. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of procedures available out there that gives you a lot more alternates, possibly able to carry less fuel for those alternates, just a lot more options. Mm-hmm. People often are concerned that they're going to maybe invest in something that will be a waste in some way, that they may have to modify to meet ADS-B, for example, and we've talked about that a little bit. But from our inside view of things and the monitoring that we're doing, we feel fairly confident that ADS-B, its definition, is where it's going to be. And when we develop WAAS solutions, as we did for these Bravo, Ultra, Encore, and XL and XLS aircraft, using the universal FMS, we're also looking at ADS-B transponders that are going to be compatible with those units. So I guess the answer is you can upgrade now or you can wait. If you upgrade now, you can take advantage of the benefits. You also are investing in WAAS, which is the foundation, I think, for next gen. Mm-hmm. You can also invest in some of the product now and invest in the upcoming years in some of the other products and spread your cost over time. So those are the discussions I would have with a customer today about why to do that.
Beating the rush also, we were talking about that.
Yeah. So sometimes there are other benefits too that are a little more subtle in addition to, for example, LPV is the thing that our minds all go to. Mm-hmm. But there is also some benefit in terms of when you have to file the required alternate. If you have WAAS capability, you can rely then more upon GPS approaches at your alternate. That used to not be the case. Used to be that with GPS, only if you were flying, if you couldn't use it in a GPS-only airport, if you will, that had only GPS approaches as a required alternate when you file. With WAAS capability, that changes. So just be aware there's some subtleties to it as well.
And I think it's a legit question. Are the standards going to change again? And the customers have seen a couple of head fakes. The FAA says we're going to do this, and then a few years later change their mind. That happens. But they get it this time. They are investing a lot of resources. They have a next gen advisory committee. It's an industry committee, or they meet with industry and they sit down and they start talking about the implementation of next gen, and they've been listening loud and clear that industry says quit doing these these head fakes. We've got to have definition. So they said, you're right, 260B, that's the standard. We're going to stick with that. And this is harmonized across the globe so that even in Europe, this is the standard they're going to use. It's not you have one standard in the US, one standard in Europe. So this is, we have a lot of confidence that we've got the ADS-B solution going forward for many years out.
Okay. Okay, next questions. We grouped a couple of them together here. Garmin retrofit versus ProLine 21 upgrades. That will be the question for many Citation owners. I think we would all appreciate understanding Cessna's direction with the two avionics platforms before we start spending money on piecemeal upgrades. Next question, Garmin retrofits may be available at the same or lower cost than piecemeal updates using Universal, Collins, Honeywell, etc. boxes wired together. At this point, I'm not convinced that for my operations, a Garmin G750 type of FMS, I believe that's the GTN 750, would make me completely happy. They are missing en-route coupled VNAV, performance calculations, etc. But at half the cost, if pilots are accepting of it as a new, better way, maybe that is where I should end up. So really, what I see here is a little bit of angst about, you know, if I start upgrading, going down the Collins upgrade path, and suddenly Cessna comes out with a whiz-bang new G whatever cockpit, you know, am I going to just be kind of putting too much money into my existing airplane? Definitely understand the concern. Dave, why don't you tackle that one?
Well, it sounds like it's a question about economics, and it's going to be difficult for us to answer that. But one thing that I think we do need to make sure our customers understand is that we're going to try to produce some level of solutions for most citations. And our ability to do this is going to be based on where it's technically feasible and where it's economically viable. But we're going to try to give you some opportunities to make some decisions on what you would like. Now, with regards to new cockpit retrofits, these all-glass refurbs that are occurring, they seem to be pretty popular right now. And these may certainly be available to some operators, but they do come at a cost. Now, before I go into cost, I will say they certainly will offer the greatest functionality and the latest technology and probably place you in the best position for meeting the next-gen mandates and others. But you do have to consider the cost. We currently offer some a G1000 retrofit to our CJs. That program starts at about $385,000 installed. We believe that some future upgrades could be in excess of $700,000 possibly if we were to go into that area. So there is cost, and whether that's going to be more or less expensive than some kind of piecemeal solution is just something that will have to be evaluated. When it comes to partial upgrades, you know, they're specifically functional in certain ways. You're going to have to look at your operational needs, both current and future. You'll want to look at your time of ownership, your budget, your hull value, and resale value. But so it's difficult for us to make that analysis. But what I can tell you, if there were a cockpit upgrade for you and there were piecemeal solutions, our sales team will be trained to sit down with you and do those kind of analysis to understand what makes sense for you. Mm-hmm. The piecemeal solution may make sense for some because you don't have to equip to every bit of the next-gen technology. Mm-hmm. Some may be very satisfied with WAAS, ADS-B, mm-hmm. and RF legs. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
I agree.
Generally speaking, too, I think we can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that whenever you're talking about a complete retrofit to the airplane, you're definitely talking about a higher order of magnitude of cost. Mm-hmm. But it's not just cost. The other factor, downtime comes into play, retraining requirements. So it really does depend, like Dave says, on an awful lot of factors that are individual to the operators. From Cessna's perspective, we don't see it as an either or. We are always looking at all of those things. We're looking at things that are just additional incremental upgrades to existing platforms. We're also evaluating complete retrofits. We do that frequently. So, you know, when we try to go after the ones that make the most sense, but it's not an either-or situation. We recognize different customers have different needs.
And what I heard in that initial question, in the first of the two, I heard the operator say, am I going to have to go away from my ProLine 21 in order to get all these capabilities? Am I going to have to do a whole retrofit or refit? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is no. there will be options like that, but there will also be options to continue supporting the ProLine 21, right?
Right. That is we are committed to that.
So
Yes.
everybody has to do that cost-benefit analysis, and so you're going to have an operator look at where next-gen capabilities are going to benefit you the most, and especially in the metroplexes or up in the northeast quadrants. Those areas are going to get some of these technologies and ground-based improvements sooner than other areas of the country. And if you operate in and out of those a lot, and it turns out that if you had some of this technology, you would get access, then you would consider, well, that's worth the cost. But if you don't fly into those areas, then you can wait a little bit longer and let the technology develop, and then make some decisions. And maybe all you need right now is some of these a WAAS LPV and an ADS-B out.
Right.
But there will be options.
There's options.
That's my point.
Right. Okay, I do want to let you know that there is some more ADS-B out information available for you. We've talked a lot about ADS-B out today. So I just want to let you know that in addition to podcasts of this sort, we are also putting together some technology briefings in written form that define what ADS-B is, that provide some links to some key regulatory documents, that also talk about, in summary form, what the upcoming mandates are around the world. And then in addition to that, where we're at. There's a table in this particular briefing that I'm going to tell you where to find it here in a minute, that has a table that shows where we're at with the different citation models. And I admit there's a footnote on there that says for anything that's not covered in this table, we're looking at solutions. So there's, for any of you who are not CJ operators in particular, or citations CJ series operators, there's probably going to be a lot of questions for you about what are we going to do to address your needs. In the U.S., we still have some time before the ADS-B out mandate kicks in, but other parts of the world, not so much. So we're definitely looking hard at that. But anyway, I wanted to point out that in the CessnaSupport.com website, there's a new section on each model landing page for the citations. You'll see it says Technology Briefings, and in parentheses, Next Gen. We have our first one out there for ADS-B out. We'll have more. The next one you should see there soon is for Link 2000 Plus. We intend these to be living documents where we keep updating these so you can see how we're doing with the various models. And so please feel free to take a look at those, and it might help to answer a few questions. I'd like to summarize today's discussion just by pointing out again that if it hasn't come through already, that Cessna and Collins are definitely committed to ProLine 21 and its future. And with all the capabilities that we've talked about, we are always looking at new things. It's not an either-or situation when it comes to full retrofits or versus small upgrades, smaller incremental upgrades. But customer priorities really will determine the chosen paths. What can we do economically at a price point that interests customers and that meets their needs? So that concludes our discussion. Are there any more comments, gentlemen, before we wrap up?
Not for me.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for listening. We hope it's been informative and safe and happy flying.
Happy landings.